right now. Today we are having a very awesome webinar. It's on the topic of how to be informed and not terrorized by data, as we spoke before. Today with us we have two excellent speakers. First one is Christopher Pramstala, analyst in audience development, auditor at Süddeutsche Zeitung, and the second one is Jay Bao, data scientist at Süddeutsche Zeitung. Just in one sentence, Süddeutsche Zeitung is one of the largest newspaper in Berlin. Correct me if I'm wrong, both guys. And we are going to talk a bit more about the topic about data journalism, which we in data science Serbia think that is very important. Before I pass the torch to the Chris and Jay, I just wanted to tell you that you can ask your questions in any given time. We will try, if we see that some of the questions fit in some part of the talk, I will ask our guests to answer in that moment. And if for sure, if not, then in the end of the talk, we will talk more about this topic. So. Basically, Jay and Chris, I will mute myself now, and I will give you a possibility to share your screen and to start with this talk. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us. My name is Christopher. Thanks for the introduction. We are actually in Munich, not in Berlin, but that must make a lot of difference. Yeah, we will talk about my part will focus on how to stay data informed in a meaningful way and not to be overwhelmed by data, because in my opinion, there is a tendency, especially in management, to overuse data, to be fixated on data and to not use it in a right way. That will be my part, will be on a meta level, I think. And Jay and Carmen, when she will join us, she had to leave urgently just a few minutes ago. They will give some examples from the paid subscription team, because both of them work on the paid subscription team, which is one of our most important product teams which focuses on selling our articles and making our readers subscribers. Just to let you know how many subscribers we have the print run right now with subscribers is about 380,000 per day. And when it comes to digital subscriptions, we passed 150,000 subscriptions. Obviously, we had new records when it came to unique users and visits in March and April. We had in March, if I remember correctly, 150 million visits and 18 million unique users. So we are one of the bigger German news sites also when it comes to reach. And I'll share my screen now to talk about my presentation. There we go. I think you should see it in a good way.
Yes,
do you see it?
Yeah, everything's fine so far.
Great. A lot of my presentation is based on a book called Tyranny of Metrics by the American historian Jerry Muller, in which he makes a case that data-driven approaches in all fields of human life, it introduces some examples in education and policing, in military and health and business, have taken over. That data has in some way taken over how we approach problems, how we want to solve problems. We've gone from measuring performance in a good way, which it definitely is, to fixating on measuring itself, he argues, and which can obviously be a step too far. I, of course, don't want to make a case against using data, which would make my job and a lot of your jobs obsolete. Yet I still want to talk to you about the thin line between metric fixation and using metrics as a complement, not as a replacement for judgment based on personal experience and other forms of evidence. So data is a very important form of evidence, but especially in management, I think we fixate on metrics a lot of times, which is not a good thing to do. The quote you see is by Stijn de Brouwer. He's a Dutch statistician and data scientist who's worked for The Guardian, for example, Fusion, and other news organizations. The quote describes what we often see when working with data, also at Süddeutsche Zeitung quite a lot of times. I myself have an editorial background. I work with the editorial staff a lot, with the newsroom a lot. That's a phenomenon we see quite often. People look at graphs, they look at trend lines, and they think they can make a lot of sense out of it, but in the end, they don't do it. We spend a lot of time talking about data. We spend a lot of time interpreting data, but in the end, maybe especially at news organizations where you have strong editors with strong opinions, the effect is not that great. Why is that so? That quote is taken out of an essay by Stijn de Brouwer called Cargo Cult Analytics, which de Brouwer held at the Hex Hackers Conference in Berlin in the year 2013. So what is the cargo cult? It's actually a real life phenomenon which describes the trap quite good that we can step into when being fixated on data and not taking other evidence into account besides data. What's the cargo cult? In one example, in World War II, thousands of US American soldiers were stationed on some islands in the Pacific. Their supply came obviously via cargo. So the soldiers built airfields, airplanes flew in, and the indigenous population on these islands also got their share of the supplies which came to the US American soldiers. And obviously they had a way better life than they had before. When the war ended though, and the soldiers obviously left, the airfields were abandoned and no planes arrived anymore, and thus also no cargo arrived anymore. What did the indigenous population do? They built headphones out of materials they could find on the island. They lit fires next to landing strips, and they even built whole planes out of wood, because they believed that when they followed certain steps that they had seen before, the results would be as expected. But of course, no cargo ever came again. The actions taken had nothing to do with the outcome they thought it would have. What does this have to do with data science or with working with data? Quite a few organizations, also Süddeutsche Zeitung at some times, and especially people in management often expect that just measuring a lot and looking at graphs, dashboards, and trend lines, as Stijn de Brouwer says in his quote, has an effect. So data seems to give insights easily. It seems to be an objective truth. And because we all know best case scenarios from other organizations, a lot of times best case scenarios which are spread by well-organized PR companies, we have a strong belief the data itself can give us insights. We obviously all know that that's not the case. And measuring things and collecting data is only the first of many steps when it comes to improving organizations and in the end making money out of it. But especially, as I said, when it comes to management, there is a tendency, and there's a mega trend in society, that we tend to just, try to aggregate a lot of data, look at graphs and trend lines, but that's just the first step. It doesn't solve the problems. So when did the rise of metrics starts, and how has it been before? Catchwords like metric, benchmark, performance indicator, accountabilities, those phrases were rising in management literature starting in the 1960s. How has it been before? In the past, management meant, in a best case scenario, decision-making based on experience, based on opinions, hopefully some evidence, and quite a bit of knowledge about the industry or field you were working in. Nowadays, there is a tendency that in a lot of organizations, management means managing by the numbers. There's a famous quote by the management guru Tom Peters made in 1986. He said, "What gets measured gets done." So put around is what you cannot measure doesn't get done. What you cannot measure doesn't get any attention. And still, it's very important in a lot of ways. Obviously, there's a reason for the rise of consulting firms who work in all kinds of industry these days, because they are masters of working with numbers, setting up goals based on KPIs. and having recipes at hand on how to do management while having loads of Excel sheets and numbers at hand. Take OKRs, for example, the management method, which is in practice at Google. If you're orthodox about that management method, there is no goal which cannot be measured. So things which cannot be measured will not get done, although they can be very important. In my opinion, though not everything can be measured, and it can take quite a lot of time and quite a lot of effort, quite a lot of money as an organization to put into measuring things, when there are other forms of evidence you could take into account, for example, user interviews, knowledge, wisdom you have about the industry, about the past, things you probably just think because you talk to a lot of people, which cannot be measured, but which are still important. Why did metrics become so popular? Industry are obviously changing faster than ever. Jay and I are from the news media industry. There is not a year without disruption on many levels, with changes on many levels. But with the changes on those many levels, the elites in a lot of industries and also in the news media industry showed that they didn't have the answers at hand based on knowledge they gained in the past. So there is a great desire for organizations when they develop to actually have an objective judgment, to actually have a compass so they know where they are going. And measuring data obviously comes in handy when you want to do this. As I said, there's a mega trend in society which puts formal knowledge, which is in the form of data, over practical knowledge, which is experience in a lot of way. While both forms are important, one is regarded as superior, which is nowadays a lot of times data, because there seems to be evidence in data. It looks scientifically, it's comparable way more easily than practical knowledge, but which can have the result that management sometimes doesn't have the guts anymore to make decisions without having data at hand. A lot of times, as some of you maybe experience, management tends to ask data scientists, web analysts to have proof for something before they actually make a decision. And this can make processes a bit slower and a bit costly. I want to emphasize, I'm in no way against measuring and using data, which would, as said, once again, make my job obsolete. And I work with data on a day-to-day basis. It's a fixation we should be careful about when working with data and still taking into account other forms of evidence. Why still use reader data at Süddeutsche Zeitung, which we do for many years already? If you look at the news media industry, we started using live data, which isn't in-depth data a lot of time, 10 or even more years ago. So there is a lot of data usage in newsroom, but probably not the right data usage at times. So when you look at the publishing landscape in a digital era, you notice quite fast that there's a lot of change in reader behavior and platform usage. The business models are changing and revenue streams aren't working as they used to be. So the economic pressure is increasing and all publishers are in search for answers. That's why we use reader data. Data can quite often, quite a few of these answers can be in data when looked at the right way, when you measure what's important and what you actually want to represent with the data, and if you're clear what you're working on towards. This means not every data point is over-interpreted. Having a management which is data literate, I think, which is important, and which has enough understanding about the industry as a whole, which probably isn't measurable ever, to make calm and forward-facing decisions. If data represents what it should, it can give accurate feedback and be a great guide in a rocky environment as we have it in the media news industry. Data can help us improve editorial on a mid and long-term basis. So what do we do at Süddeutsche Zeitung when we work with reader data, which we do? Why live data has, as I said, been omnipresent in the newsroom, there isn't much action you can take on it. There's very little room you can do when looking at live data. For example, if you know that a certain number of readers is on an article, as an editor, there's not much you can do. The article is published, and you will not change it because it's what you did. So we try to establish a meaningful routine of reviews in the newsroom, in the editorial staff, which is basic knowledge to everyone working in an environment with coding and developing, but not at all to editors, for example. Data only speaks to us when we work with it, and when we work with it in a meaningful way, when we sit down, interpret, and really try to improve on it. Data itself doesn't give you advice, as we all know. So being fixated on metrics and just looking at it will not give us answer. It doesn't bring us anywhere. It's what do you make out of the data. That's what Jay in a minute will talk about, how to actually make sense out of data. The last quote I want to give you before I'm finished, I think sums up quite good where we are right now. It's by sociologist William Bruce Cameron and was already made in 1936. And it says, not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. So we can count a lot, and we should actually do it, but we shouldn't ask for all the answers only in data. There are many forms of evidence out there, and they all have their place, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher, so much. This is just one small thing. You need to stop sharing so somebody else can start sharing. Before we switch to Jay and our third speaker who will join us, Carmen, I just wanted to ask you, maybe are you familiar with dynamic system theory, where basically did you have something like that in count, like this kind of theory where you just focus on a few maybe key point indicators, and you follow them as a key point, not maybe all of the data? So maybe did you try that kind of approach also, or didn't?
Of course, there's always we always try to have the right KPIs represent what we want to measure, but as you know, when it comes to decision makers in a lot of organizations, and the bigger the organizations get, the harder it is to have data literate people who make the decisions. So when it comes to management, well, there is a belief a lot of times that they want to change something, please be the analyst who measures exactly what I want to have. And a lot of times that's not possible. So there's the expectation, to always bring evidence, right. To always bring evidence exactly that there's proof that things they want to do work. And you can do this actually, but it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of energy and a lot of money to actually do it. So quite often, it could be good to not only collect data, to look at data, but maybe just do a user interview, maybe just look at a theory which was written down, maybe, trust your guts at some point in time, make decisions, and not turn to data all the time. But, as I said, I believe it's a mega trend in society. We all know the stories where data has worked in a really great way, where data has helped improve organizations. But just because we saw it somewhere else doesn't mean that with the flip of your hand, it will work at your organization as well. Especially, for example, if you work in the news media industry, there are so many variables, as Jay will probably can tell a story about. There are so many variables, so it's really, really hard to know what exactly changed and why did it change. So having hard evidence is hard to bring by.
Before we switch to Jay and continue with the technical part, I have just another question, because I think that you raised a very important, segment, which is data literacy, basically. And I think that you're like 100% right. That there is an issue. Even the very experienced managers, the good managers, CEOs, etc. Sometimes they are still not like in that way understand the data and what we can get from the data, not in the terms of them being data scientists or data analysts, but understanding the possibility, etc. So basically, maybe if you can give us like one or two your giveaways, how did you manage to explain to your supervisors these kind of issues, and how this address, like what is your experience, some giveaways? I think that it can be a very cool and very good for our listeners, if of course if you're willing to share your knowledge. Joking, of course.
Well, yeah, I mean, in a lot of talks I have with the management, I try to tell them, well, don't just always look at numbers, look at other forms of evidence too. I think what helps quite a bit is doing classical user research. Because classical user research as a method can bring you a lot of answers in a very quickly, which aren't that complicated, which can be done by a lot of people, and just taking, well, this form of research into account, which is just totally different than data science, but is complementary and it's great. Just trying this, playing around with it, introducing it into your processes more and more can be a great step to do, I think. And bringing those together, actually, having like data and the meaning of people together can be a great solution, I think.
Thank you, Christopher, for your insight. I think it is very valuable to have also your experience share. Jay, I will give you the mic now. So I'm very keen to hear the technical also point, and how do you approach these kind of things, and your side of the story also.
Yes, thanks, Christopher, and also for the interesting, thought-provoking presentation, which reminds me of another quote, which is, basic counting is the most difficult problem in data science, which I kind of totally agree. So I will be talking about, as Christopher already introduced, our subscription team. If I can...
We see your screen.
Show up the screen. Mm-hmm. Yes. Basically, so I will be representing Carmen today, one of my colleagues. Unfortunately, she's delayed at work, and so what we prepared is so introduction of who we are and what we do, and also maybe introduce you about true hands-on, like kind of real-world data science projects, and just to give you a flavor and how we work at the Süddeutsche Zeitung. So first of all, who we are. So we are relatively a small team with 4 data engineers / scientists. We started a little bit over a year ago, and also work closely with two data analyst and Scrum Master, our product owner, and also a test engineer. To be honest, I hate the word full stack. I think in the end, in this world, there's hardly someone that can call himself or herself a unicorn. But I have to say that since we are also a relatively small team and kind of like a startup, and we actually end up doing a lot of things like cross-functional teams, like everyone working on really diverse topics like engineering and data science tasks, and which is something also we are all quite proud of. So in the beginning, we also set a goal for our team, which is exactly something like this sentence we wrote down. We want to pre-process, analyze the data, mainly consisting of a clickstream of our readers and also transaction data. We want to build machine learning models or data-based product features in order to support optimize the acquisition and retention of digital subscribers. So how we work? So this is really a bird's eye view of the technical infrastructure in our team. We start with tracking the user behavior on our website and in the app, and then we store that raw data, pre-process that in the cloud, and so perform maybe ad hoc analysis. So on the one hand, as Christopher already said, to enable data-informed decision making. And just a minute, can I? Yes. On the other hand, we also build data products like in order to personalize the user experience on our website and so on. So it's here. It's also quite obvious that we have mainly two internal stakeholders. So one is the newsroom. This is basically, I'll also talk about a bit in a minute, and that we also build like dashboards with our analysts and together to enable the decision making process. Also, another important stakeholder is our marketing team, in which case we kind of make use of the readers' user behavior data and try to help them to optimize targeting, for example, of different marketing campaigns. So yes, exactly. So so one example of this decision making process for the newsroom is that we built a data pipeline kind of to support the business intelligence part of the whole organization. Used like a diverse tech stack and to provide the real-time behavior data and aggregate that on a certain level and according to different KPIs defined by the stakeholders, and in the end running a kind of dashboard for them. So so this is basically how so who we are in general and how we work. I'd like to start from the business side and talk a little bit about the unique problem that we are facing in this age. So I think up to date is probably known to everyone that we have these two pillars of major revenue sources for publishers, or the advertising, and this New York Times called it consumer generated revenue, which is basically a subscription. Or some publishers also have some membership model and so on. So the one pillar is advertising revenue is declining over the time, and that's why it's also with the time more and more important to focus on, so to say, the subscription part, and especially the digital subscription. That's also when I think kind of the idea was born that that we want to, people want, especially also the management, want to like make more use of data and try to kind of making sense out of data, and use that in directly in the product development, and in order to kind of drive the subscription business. So just to give you some examples of how we interact with our like end user customers on our website. So this is how our paywall looks like. Yeah, basically you can like show different offers to a user, and we also have this kind of an overview site with all where you can compare basically different offers at one time, and make your decisions to buy a subscription. Also have this so-called interactive editorial. Yeah, it's just one module element on our homepage, where we show so the best articles from the newsroom, which are basically all premium articles with a paywall, and that's also our main so the also the main entry point for user to first get in touch with a premium article and or even a paywall at all. Then there's this also not personalized, but also an home like a page with all premium articles, and it's generated like algorithmically according to the tracking data. So, for example, it depends on whether a certain so which articles are most viewed or bought by our users, and then we will group those kind of best-selling articles into this one page, and make it like portal, or give it an overview to all of our users. Then there's this banner also on our website, where we usually so that's mainly taken over by our marketing team. They can show different advertisement about our subscription, or even sometimes we call it text marketing. So you see some maybe a link to a certain premium article where you can, there's also another kind of touch point that we can attract or target a certain group of users, and make them aware of the paywall and the subscription, and and so on. So as you can see, this is a lot of like different touch points, and I think one can group that roughly into a kind of subscription funnel. We, for example, start with the banner. Here's where we can communicate first with the user, or especially the anonymous new users. And on the paywall, usually we help them to make decisions to buy a certain subscription. And afterwards, you have to go through the whole payment process, that where you enter your personal data and stuff like that. So once you are a subscriber with us, it's then also crucial to make sure that yeah, we generate kind of more revenue, or we upsell on the user and make them eventually stay longer with us, so as long as possible. And so as you can imagine, I think the main KPIs we are looking at, so how, for example, how the paywall performs, views the click-through rate, how the whole payment process is, the conversion rate of that, which we also constantly monitor, and altogether the number of subscribers and cancellations and so on. Also in terms of user behavior, you can derive like different KPIs, for example, intensity, frequency, recency, and metrics like that from the clickstream data. So one interesting challenge we faced recently is so the new business or the new pricing model that we launched basically in the last quarter of 2019. So the idea is to have a more diverse price class structure in order to further grow our subscription, and also target like different user groups, maybe with different demands on the subscription functionality. So here you see that we have like a cheaper variant, the Basis Abo, which is yeah, kind of priced at Netflix or Spotify level, if the new digital generation is more familiar with. And then to other different variants of subscriptions. That so one is that you have additional edition for the weekends, and then with everything together. So so the whole package is like the most expensive ones. So the unique challenge here is, of course, if you want to launch such a campaign, you want to make sure that you target the right people, that you want to avoid this so-called cannibalization effect. That, for example, users who already have a high affinity to our product and maybe a subscription, you want to avoid showing them maybe a cheaper variant. In the sense that this will reduce the revenue somehow. Also, on the other hand, of course, for the rest of the users, you want to then like push this Basis Abo, this cheaper variant more, in order to attract more people at least into the funnel, and then maybe later on think about upselling and retention and so on. So this already brings us to one of the two examples that we did in our team. So first one, what I want to introduce is purchase propensity, where we try to personalize or differentiate that paywall according to the user probability to buy a subscription. And as you can imagine, this targets mainly on the second step of this funnel, which is the decision making. And so what we did is basically we collected clickstream data from our users. For example, here you see from different referrers and what they read actually in the session, and in the end whether they bought a subscription or not. Based on this data, you can derive different like user-based features. For example, I think you can group them in mainly two categories. So the context features, they are related to so the current session, so on which device the user is on, and also maybe an hour of the day, day of the week, stuff like that. And then we have the historical reading behavior, meaning something like yeah, so the visit frequency maybe, or some so affinity to a certain type of articles, and which you can also aggregate from the clickstream data. And then basically we built a supervised machine learning model, in this case a decision tree, and to predict a probability of a user to purchase a subscription. And based on this probability, and we wrote out different offers on our paywall. Like for example, the idea is to is that for users with a high purchase propensity, we will show the full package, like the more expensive variant, and for the rest of the users with a rather low purchase propensity, that I think it's rather beneficial to show them the cheaper one. So let's just for a moment dive a little bit deep into the model itself. What I show here is actually a config file which we used in our machine learning framework, where you can see that we specify our input data and also the training period. It's a little bit over a month, and then we use 7 days of data for the test set, also to have as diverse as possible, and to in order to reduce kind of a bias in a test data set itself. And also what is interesting here is we experimented a lot with different target variables. And here, so in the beginning, we tried out so the sale event as a target variable. And then we kind of moved to the click event, so the click-through event on the paywall, because it's it can, so basically it has we have obviously as more clicks than a sale event, and this can make our iteration, so this will definitely kind of reduce our requirement on sample size if we want to run some A/B tests, and which also makes our iteration of the model development much faster. And then, of course, we have different features, as I introduced before, context-based or behavior-based. And what is also interesting is that here we define different hyperparameters of our model. Here's decision tree classifier expressed in this scikit-learn syntax. And also we try to, we tested really different combinations of these parameters, and mostly in order to avoid overfitting. For example, here you can restrict depth of the tree, there's a complexity of the model, or the size, basic size of each leaf node, which is also in order to reduce, avoid overfitting. mean impurity decrease. This is basically the criteria when you want to do the splitting of a parent node in two children nodes. This yeah, you can basically find an optimal combination of these parameters by doing some search algorithms. So in order to evaluate model, in order to decide okay, which combination of parameters is best in the use case, of course you need some target function, some certain metric. So here as a first step, yeah, it's kind of a classification problem where you can always define this confusion matrix, specifying the true positive, false positive, false negatives, and true negatives. According to that, calculating different metrics, and which is also interesting, that for example, accuracy. This is something easy to communicate, but also but not so useful in this case, because we have a rather imbalanced data set, and we have a very few, for example, a SEO event, and so this will, if you only look at that, will automatically make your like a naive model look good. And so the precision, which is yeah, how you so how many of the positive labels identify the model are actually true positives, and recall how so how many of the true labels in the reality can be detected kind of by the model. And this the combination of this, so we actually used the F1 score in our optimization algorithm, and it's yeah, kind of useful for metric, but we also along the way realized that sometimes it's also easier to communicate to the stakeholder by talking about precision and recall, and because it's kind of more intuitive. So as a next step, of course, you want to so it's so the offline metrics, what you measured, precision recall, is always in theory, and in the end, you want to measure the true business impact of your model. For example, by comparing the effect of deploying a model to some baseline, in this case, simply randomization. So we, in this case, we split the user groups randomly, like 50-50 into. So one half will receive the basis offer, and the other the full package. And here on the right-hand side, then we simply let a model decide, so to say, according to this purchase propensity, whether, so if it's below a certain threshold, then we will show the user this basis paywall, and if the user has, according to the model, has a higher propensity, then they will be presented this paywall with the full package. So from the numbers in the A/B test, we can conclude that okay, first of all, it seems that the model works, and so the users with a higher propensity, they tend to buy also more complete subscriptions, the more expensive ones. And also we can observe the stable growth of both variants. Which is a good news, because yeah, in this case we kind of avoided the cannibalization effect, and at the same time we were able to kind of grow our user base or subscriber base with this new price class structure. So another important thing is that so we went live kind of with this setup. So the we trained a model in the Google Cloud, also with the clickstream data, and deployed it into the model into the paywall, and this will decide. So basically, calculate the propensity on the fly when the user visits the website or we're encountered with a paywall, and according to that propensity, we show them different types of paywalls. But at the same time, we also keep a small amount of traffic to be sort of to be a control group for a longer time period in order to enable live monitoring, or if we want to access the performance model in the future, and maybe it's also an opportunity to gather this randomized data, and if we want to, for example, train a new model, or have other use cases based on that. So I think we altogether learned a lot in this project, and which reminds me exactly of this, I think now really famous figure from the paper 5 years ago about hidden technical debt in machine learning, where the take-home message is that the modeling work, machine learning is actually a really small amount of the whole pipeline, the whole project. Where at the same time you have to deal with data collection and data cleaning, feature engineering, pre-processing, and also in the end model serving or testing, monitoring infrastructure. I think we so we can totally agree with this figure, and we also touched upon a lot of these kind of puzzle pieces in order to build our end-to-end machine learning pipeline. Then I will say a few words about another example, which is the customer lifetime cohorts, where the idea is to target, to make a targeting of marketing campaigns and the communication more specific, for example, on the user segments with a longer lifetime. Here you can see that this can actually have like diverse use cases. For example, can be used in the very beginning of the funnel, so how we communicate with new users, and as well as in the retention case, where if you want to like communicate with our current subscribers, and it also helps maybe to have a prediction, to have an idea of okay, what's the probability of this user to stay longer with us, or keep the subscription longer. And so as a first step, we basically divided our users or subscribers into different segments. So for example, those who canceled a subscription after the trial period, who paid, for example, 1 month of subscription after the trial, and so on and so forth. And for each of these segments, you can, so we basically look at different user behavior or features in different time frames. For example, how what's its reading behavior before, immediately before the subscription, so to say, and also what do they read, how often do they read in the trial period, and also after that. We looked into different features and try to correlate that with definition of the user segments, the lifetime cohorts. Unfortunately, it didn't observe immediate correlation between, for example, a single feature and the user segment. So what we thought about is, as a next step is to try to apply some machine learning model, again in this case, try to classify the cohorts based on the user features, and also test how robust this model might be, in the hope that we can, so based on the model prediction, we can, so to say, fine-tune our marketing campaigns, and and give maybe special treatment to those user groups with who are likely to be a long-term customer. So this brings me almost to the end of our presentation, and I just want to share with you some maybe food for thought. Also, the things we learned over the time. Also, the questions we we also always try to ask ourselves the whole time. And I think when dealing with such data projects and machine learning products, and what one always has to keep in mind is so the yeah, it's a dynamic system. So the user behavior, both user behavior and product changed over time. So also a lot of ongoing discussion during the current crisis. So what should we do to, like, so to say, make the model adapt to the new situation and maybe new user behavior, and also in terms of new product features. And I remember one quote from our ex-CEO. Once he said something like, so the business model in news industry is much more complicated, like than, for example, e-commerce. It's not only like buying stuff and try to sell that. So instead, here we have really a diverse structure of offers, like different prices, different it's actually different business models, and you want to you also always have to keep that in mind. And when something new happens or will develop, for example, in the case of our new pricing class situation, you want to take that into account, and maybe make use of data or machine learning to solve that business problem. And of course, what we also ask ourselves a lot, the data protection regulations, and of course, especially a hot topic in Europe, and how we can deal with that and constantly keep our user data safe and protected, and but at the same time still making use of that. And this is also kind of a challenge of a data scientist in the current day. So different questions like whether the model in production works as expected. So that's of course important to set up a certain kind of monitoring, as I talked about a bit before. Also, you want to probably question yourself, whether the assumptions that you made previously are kind of still true. I can still rely on that. Yeah, I think that's it from what we wanted to present you, and yeah, thank you and for coming, and we're happy to take questions if there's any.
Yeah, okay. First of all, thank you, Jay, for your very cool talk. I was very inspired, and like I said, I already prepared a few questions. Like I was very interested in this topic.
Yes.
Also, Tian also so far have one question, but also before we start answering question, I would like to ask again people, if you have some kind of interesting things and you want to find something new, this is the right time to write down the question. So from Tiana. First, thank you for excellent presentations. What advice would you give to smaller local media wishing to delve into data analysis, the one that maybe do not have enough resource to set up a full data team? And how many people approximately is at your media organization, or at your media organization would you consider data literacy? So basically, I think that is both for you and Christopher, perhaps.
So about the size of the organization, I'm not sure. So in my impression, the work like close to so it's between 200-300 people. So working on the digital side for the digital business, so responsible for the website and apps and so on. And half of them are maybe in the newsroom, and the rest are basically product development. And yeah, so we are kind of organized in a way that we have so on the product development side, we have different product teams responsible for different parts of the product, and we try to do it, organize that in a cross-functional way. That so in each team you have really this end-to-end responsibility. That you have like all disciplines, like back-end, front-end developers, and data analysts, and maybe data scientists, and yeah, to work on the single product, and yeah, in order to make I think the greatest impact.
And the second part of the question was maybe, do you think it is possible? Maybe I will like to maybe a little bit rephrase the question from Tiana. Is it possible, achievable to for some smaller local media who would like to go into data analysis, but they don't have enough resources to set up a full data team? Do you have maybe some kind of proposal, or did you have a chance to maybe also work with some other colleagues? Sorry if you hear my dog in the background.
Yeah, I think so. We are so one of the biggest daily newspaper in Germany, and also have a really great outreach on the website and so on, and relatively so it's like a big organization where we are also part of the media group, which has some local publishers and so on. So from time to time, we had some contact with so these maybe local publishers, and of course they are struggling with like different problems. They're, yeah, I mean they're obviously like much smaller, and want to first maybe grow their user base, and or in terms of product development, and maybe trying to set up the proper data infrastructure first, and so on. So I think it's yeah, really difficult. I think it's yeah, really difficult to compare like different organizations, and this is really on different scales, and I think the challenges we and they are facing are kind of sometimes completely different. Yeah, so
it
I
makes
don't know.
sense. It makes sense. Like basically,
Mm-hmm.
like first of all, maybe it's very hard. Like I don't know if you don't have to set up a full data science team. They have a different type how they will manage data. So basically, that will be much more expensive even than having a data science team. So basically, maybe right now, maybe in the future, there will be going to be some kind of a data product or AI-based product, which can be a good idea actually. To help the media to address this kind of thing. But right now, like I said, I think that will be raised many more actually open questions than solutions in the end, like some kind of I don't know, some kind of contribution, something like that. Maybe like what I'm thinking right now, if there are going to be some kind of tool that can cover this kind of thing, but also it will be I'm not sure like how much development inside of that should be possible. Also, okay, we have also a few additional questions. We have one question from Momir Milutinovic, and we have 3 questions from Marko Vasilevsky so far. So I will go with Momir first. In the propensity results slide, we can see that the system offers the more expensive subscription if P is above 60%. How did you come to this number?
Yeah, a very interesting question. So I think so. In this case, we basically look at structure of the decision tree and basically the probability of each leaf node and try to calculate the proximity. How many? So how? So what's the sample size that we expect? If we put like 100% of traffic, the user into this decision tree, and how many of them that we expect that will end up within this single leaf node, then we try to somehow divide these nodes into groups and try to balance. So basically divide the nodes into 2 groups and with different probability thresholds and well, at the same time keeping the size of both groups more or less the same. And that's yeah, I think more or less how this 60% came up. So it's
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, the next question is from Marco. First one is okay, Christopher is going to leave us in a few minutes, but he will stay with us also to answer to a few more questions. Okay, first question is Marco is saying, thank you guys, you deal with such complex data. Being said from Marco, he is really mean that. First question is, have you considered Bayesian methods to introduce data-independent SME knowledge and for regularization purpose, since you have such complex data?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that question.
Have you considered
the regularized
Bayesian methods to introduce data-independent SME knowledge and for regularization purpose, since you have such a complex data?
Complex in terms of?
He didn't ask. In terms of how many, I believe how many from different aspects and different things you are watching in the same period. Maybe Marco can write down a bit more. What does he mean by complex data? We can maybe go to the second and third question while Marco is writing a bit more. If you can a bit more rephrase this first question. How do you handle a class imbalance in a churn model? That's the second question.
Yeah, the churn model. So that's actually still work in progress. And what we, as I said, what we expect is still some imbalanced data set, and where probably, I mean, the different techniques, like different models to reweight the different classes, and for example, yeah, basically in the decision tree, you can also give different weights to your data points of different coming from different classes, and so, or even from other directions, people also use some upsampling, downsampling techniques, so to say, to deal with the imbalance problem. We haven't, there was still on our to-do list, haven't really benchmarked different these sampling techniques. So instead we just, we were mainly using this reweighting stuff in different algorithms. Yeah.
Okay, I sent to you on the first question, but we can on the chat, and we can go with the third one. Third question was, can you compensate changes in the dynamics of change in user behavior, especially during Corona time, but imputing subject matter expertise knowledge in shape of probabilistic distribution when the data is not changing and misbehaved?
Yeah, so it's about a data shift over time, right? As far as I understood. So I think what is crucial is really to have some kind of monitoring, because something what I can imagine is so if you monitor the distributions of your features, or maybe the distribution of your target variables over time, and eventually you will, if you observe, so to say, over time, really shift in the distribution, and this is a kind of a signal that probably you want to retrain your model or adapt something, because the underlying data is probably changing, and which means that probably you have to think about your previous assumptions and stuff like that. So this is what I would suggest.
Okay, I will ask again if somebody has a question to ask us. I have three very simple, let's say, questions, which is not maybe totally connected only to the technical part, because the first part wasn't only about the data and the tech part. But the first one is you mentioned something very interesting to me, that is cannibalization. Basically, that maybe you are eating yourself a profit if you are providing wrong. Did you maybe consider a project where you can try with data science and AI in behind, to see if you are offering some new part of product? I don't know, some new section, for example, sports section inside. Okay, you have a sports section, but if you're offering something new that can maybe just let's say eat itself, like basically to double itself. For example, if you have two similar columns, that they are basically have the same target group that you can sell. So basically, you're not offering anything new to the target group. Have this kind of some kind of these kind of projects available, that you're addressing the products that you're serving, like the content of the newspaper as it is.
So it's about like new product features, or new, like a new content in a way. It's also an interesting question, because it's also something that we try to work together with the marketing team and find out a way. So what we were planning is that so first of all, finding out what like different what can be maybe new features of our product, or some new content, and then try to figure out like a specific target group for that new feature. And in the end, doing some A/B test, or like experiments to try to verify that so this targeting somehow works in the real world. And so I think this is really that's also already our kind of a roadmap. And
Okay, nice. The second question, like what I also see interesting on the first slide, that you said that you have a Scrum Master inside of data science team. So basically, I didn't seen a lot, like Scrum methodology to be adapted as a part of data science. I have seen the different kind of methodologies, like with the people I'm working with, like, and I'm talking with. I mean, when I'm talking about Scrum, I mean the real Scrum, not like some kind of, or some type of the Scrum, like methodology. So maybe if you can share some, by your opinion, of what were a good and bad experience with implementing Scrum inside of a data science team, like. Basically, I think the other side has two sides, so maybe if you can share that with us.
Yeah, also very interesting. I think we can maybe talk about that for another hour. It's really, yeah, really exciting and topic, and also comes up a lot in our team. Maybe just to mention so advantage and disadvantage. So I think what works is this so the alignment part. I think so also some so kind of streamlined work that you have. You kind of force your self to even by doing some maybe research work or like data exploratory data analysis. You always force yourself to think about the time frame, or maybe do it in the time box, or as a spike. I don't know. People call it differently, and just yeah, try to also manage the expectation from the product side maybe, and also adapt it over time. So that's for one. And what we are also struggling a lot is, I mean, in the end, I think we are always trying different things, like yeah, I'm not doing like that Scrum, because I think I also don't think that you can be quite productive or successful by being too dogmatic and following all the rules and from the guides. So what we do, which I like a lot, is we experiment a lot also. This is of course not an A/B test, but we experiment a lot with different processes, yeah, in terms of how we work, and maybe, yeah, we just sometimes we have an idea, and if that doesn't work out, and we just drop it, and so the difficult part is probably this sometimes you of course, yeah, I think you are kind of struggling with a more traditional like software engineering mindset, where you have a very clear definition of ready, definition of done, and also that acceptance criteria. And on the other hand, so the data science work, where all this kind of stuffs are most of the time badly defined. So that's yeah, which I see as some maybe a conflict point at some time. So yeah, so I personally, I think, as I said, it's a very interesting topic, and I'd also yeah, like to hear more feedback about that, and if you have also more experience with that, and let us know. And yeah.
Yeah, basically, like why I ask you this, because like I was talking with one of my friends, like we were having chit-chatting like before, and one of the things we said, what is the problem with implementing the real Scrum, is because when you're not finished 100% in a data science project, you cannot know if any of the previous work was meaningful. In software engineering, that's not how it works. Basically, you can really divide on the epoch, and you can see, okay, if you develop one feature, second feature, third feature, fourth feature. In data science, it's not like that all the time. Sometimes you can have this kind of project, but most of the times, what you're saying, like basically until we get to the end, we don't know. After we get to the end, we can then improve the models, etc., and features, and add something new, and to try to count something. Okay, that can also be very different. And sometimes scalability can be a problem, but that was the main issue. Like,
absolutely. Okay. I think in the end, or a data team, or even a non-data team, or traditional engineering team, what probably you end up doing is some kind of middle way. Yeah, I don't know, between Scrum, Carmen, or whatever. And so you always have to, I think, adapt to your own needs, and yeah, you have different situations, and like a different problems kind of you are facing, and so there, yeah. So I really liked so the idea of also agile, also by iterating, like maybe trying out different processes, and different also different ways of working, and by experimenting, and I think you can kind of improve and optimize. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Last question, which can be a little bit tricky question. So if you don't want to answer that, is okay. Because Christopher in the beginning has a very interesting thing. Sometimes something that can be count, you can with eye test eye test C, or let's say subject matter expertise sometimes can be good enough, so you don't even need to count something, because that can be expensive. So did you have maybe situation, and what happens when this expert subject matters or eye test is in collision with what you find out as a data? For example, if you think there is two different opinions, one comes from subject matter, a second comes from the data, how do you overcome these kind of issues inside of the team in your environment, as journalism in your environment?
Oh yeah. I think maybe Christopher also has an opinion on that. What I experienced so far is I think it's the whole organization. I can say that is really open, and also in terms of open to experiments. For example, yeah, stakeholders we worked with so far, the marketing team, so they're willing to test out different maybe different price classes, or different marketing campaigns, and also in the newsroom. Can say that, so at least some colleagues I worked with, they also they actually work with data a lot, which makes the communication between us really easier, because we built different dashboards for them in the past, and which is already integrated into their kind of a daily business, and they by looking at the numbers, they decide on how to yeah, so which yeah, try to make, so to say, editorial decisions, and for example, maybe which articles to show on the homepage, and so on. And I also think that in the end, what usually works, or what has a high probability of working, is to again this keyword data informed, to especially think about the data, or all these tools, dashboards, and as a tool to support, so to say, the decision making, and always keep in mind that there's some human behind that, or a domain expert, in this case our editors, and maybe, yeah. So our job is, I think, really to support them in a way in the decision-making process, and maybe we can automate certain stuff by calculating the numbers and put it into a dashboard, and but yeah, certain decisions still come from them, from so to say, those experts, and but yeah, in this case, I think you as a data team still made a great impact if you can already make this so the decision-making process smoother, and yeah, so that's basically my opinion.
Okay, thank you so much, Jay, for your sharing. I see that there is no questions. Also, Karen, I saw that you joined us. You didn't have a chance to speak anything, but thank you for also joining and preparing this wonderful presentation. Also,
thanks for inviting us.
And of course, I would like to thank you, Christopher. Already I needed to go, but thank you for your time. And for sure, guys, we will stay in touch, because I think that this is very interesting, and I'm very happy to see that we have more and more cool experiences and cool practices.
Definitely. Also interesting feedback and interaction during the question round.
Okay, thank you. Yep. Okay, that will be that. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all on the chance to be your host, and hopefully we will see you next Thursday also on another Data Science Serbia webinar. We believe that this is a good thing to raise the awareness and popularize data science and AI in Serbia, because that's the main thing that the Data Science Serbia is doing. It's like sometimes they mix us that we are not doing also artificial intelligence, but that's not true. We are doing both parts. So thank you so much, and hope to hear from you soon. Bye bye.